Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again, and today for something completely different I'm reviewing the Beastie Boys book by Michael Diamond and Adam Horovitz, a book that's not just a celebration of one of the most original bands in hip-hop history, but it's a veritable treasure chest of narrative originality and extravaganza that I would put up there with works like S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst, or with the best novels by Mark Danielewski. And I hope I'll convince anybody out there who has even just a passing interest in the Beastie Boys that they would really have a great time with the Beastie Boys book. Before I begin, I should mention that today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is an online community of creatives, and it's a website offering video classes on an immense variety of topics, from creative writing to music. I'll talk about music and music producing later, on video making and more. I will talk about Skillshare more at the end of the video, but what you should know is that there's a link in the description box that will give the first 1,000 people to click on it 2 months of free subscription to Skillshare. I highly recommend you check it out. Even beyond the 2 months, Skillshare's Premium is very cheap. It's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. Do check the website out. The Beastie Boys book details the band's history in their own terms, but even more than a story of the Beastie Boys as a band, I felt that this was a story of their evolution as passionate lovers of music, and that might be one of the main reasons why I believe even people who don't necessarily consider themselves hardcore fans of the band would still love and appreciate this book. There are many discussions in here about the relevance and the significance of music at different stages in your life, when you're young, when you're a teenager, and when and later on, as you music as something you share with your friends, music as something that you discover by yourself as a collector, music as something you still enjoy once you have a family, once you become sort of a grown-up. There are many discussions in here about the different types of media, the different ways of appreciating music, about the physicality of tapes and vinyl and physical formats compared to digital formats. But there are some very interesting passages in here where Adam Horovitz says that he would have loved to have an iPhone as a kid, that the instant accessibility of music nowadays is not really something to be discarded or discounted, and I myself too sometimes have this tendency to idolize and to romanticize the past, where people just had to carry around their boombox every time they wanted to listen to their tunes, without really realizing how lucky me and my generation really are in terms of how easy it is for us to access basically all of the music ever recorded in recent history. Talking more about that idea that this is not just about the Beastie Boys as a band, even more, I feel like this is a history of the scenes where the Beastie Boys moved their first steps and then gained international fame. Even more than about the band, at times this feels like a history of New York City in the late 70s and early 80s, of a troubled city in that sense, as a testimony of that very difficult time, but very, very stimulating time in the history of the city. This is as valuable a document as a novel such as City on Fire by Garth Schellenberg, which deals with the same era in the city's history. It is a history of a hardcore. I feel like this might be a history of hardcore punk in the US, even more than it is a history of hip-hop. Although hip-hop, of course, and especially the early years of hip-hop in the late 70s, early 80s in New York, they do play an obvious, very important part in the history of the band. The structure and the format of the book is what really makes it. I will try to show some of it without spoiling all of the surprises waiting for the reader across the entire book, and there are many, many surprises, but most of the Beastie Boys book is composed of small chapters by either Horovitz or Diamond, where maybe a certain chapter in the history of the band is recollected, maybe you're just given a single anecdote, and there are plenty of the anecdotes you would expect from the Beastie Boys about like terrible apartments where the bathtub was in the middle of the living room and rats were running free all over the building, those sorts of New York stories. And this these pretty straightforward narrative chapters are interspersed with chapters in the form of comic books, with comical skits, with chapters in the forms of playlists. One thing I absolutely recommend, I did it during my reading of the book, is creating a playlist of the tunes of the songs mentioned in the book. If nothing else, this is a veritable treasure chest of old gems, old songs that I will bet many of you won't be familiar with. I definitely wasn't familiar with some of the most obscure but most interesting and most original songs mentioned in here. The book is so vivid and so convincing in its portrayal of New York City in the late 70s that I was expecting Jonathan Lethem to show up at any point. And he does, he actually does pretty early into the book. He contributes a chapter together with Blake Lethem, who is his brother and who apparently was involved in the early hip-hop scene in New York. I'm not quite sure in what form, and if you know more about Blake Lethem as a rapper, I'm very curious to hear about it. And he contributes a story, a chapter about the history of white rappers and white rap, at least in the early years of rap. And other writers, most notably Colson Whitehead, contributes a hilarious comic chapter, and you get so many voices lending their pen to this pursuit and making the book so much more interesting. You get the sense of the book almost being a hip-hop album in itself, where so many other artists collaborate with the album's creator to make something that becomes the sum of all their talents. As much as this is a celebration of the band's history, this is also a book to remember Adam Yauch, the third member of the Beastie Boys, who passed away in 2012. And in the introduction to the book, Horovitz is very clear in saying that the band, the three of them, had always been discussing the idea of making a book about their history, and Yauch was very into the idea, but tragically was never able to complete it. And the book, in a way, is a testament to Yauch's history, to his contribution to the world of music, and to the lives of the people he loved. And all throughout the book, you can perceive the terrible charismatic presence of Yauch, but you can also perceive the band coping with their memories of him, dealing with this friend that passed away so tragically soon, in a way that makes the book extremely poignant, and it makes it pack quite a powerful punch when Horovitz and Diamond and the other writers involved have to make up for this voice, this third voice that was supposed to be here and to contribute to this story, but couldn't. In the same way, the book also deals with pretty important and pretty serious topics, in acknowledging the rather problematic history of the Beastie Boys as a band and their toxic masculinity and the machism and the misogyny that marked the early years of their career, and especially their debut album License to Ill. Now, I think the book deals with that stuff very bravely and very honestly. In the course of their career, of their later career, the Beastie Boys have distanced themselves very explicitly from that world and that worldview and that idea of masculinity, and that's excellent. If you ask me, that's awesome. They do acknowledge that was part of their image starting out. Kate Schellenberg, who was an original member of the band when they were still a hardcore act and was excluded from the band later on when they moved to rap, kind of for the main reason that she was a woman, contributes a chapter and engages with the history of the band, with the painful history of that moment in their youth. They were still basically all kids when that happened, and she talks about how she dealt with it at the time, how her relationship with the band evolved, how they were able to connect again and maybe to become friends again years later. And overall, I didn't get the feeling that this was just a way for Beastie Boys to wash their hands of their earlier behavior and to attain a form of sainthood or something. I felt it was a honest way of dealing with all this without trying to dismiss what happened, but while also acknowledging what they can do about it now and pointing to constructive ways of improving this situation and improving on their past image. I do believe that there is a little bit of scapegoating going on, or at least that was the impression I got, in that a lot of the horrible behavior of the Beastie Boys when they were kids, in terms of kicking Kate Schellenberg out of the band, choosing a certain very obnoxious public image of themselves as frat boys that was supposed to be a joke, but then very soon became the reality of their image. All of this is ascribed to Rick Rubin. It was all Rick Rubin's fault. At some points in the course of the book, there is a sense that that's the message that's been that they're trying to get across, but that's fine, as in, for all I know, that's actually what happened, and it was all Rick Rubin's fault all along. And I'm not even joking right now. Like, as all historical documents, this doesn't exist to be swallowed up. It exists to be studied and taken, well, with a pinch of salt. If anything, one of the great things about it is that because this story is sold from so many different perspectives, you get a little bit of what you always find in memoirs and in historical text, but not always this self-consciously, which is the fact that everybody has a different version of the story. And there are some very interesting chapters where maybe a couple of people will remember an event that happened in their youth, and then you'll have a declaration by somebody else saying, no, that never happened, that's not true. There's a chapter about throwing eggs on a former friend of the Beastie Boys, and Kate Schellenberg just says, no matter what they say, we never threw eggs on that poor guy. I was fully expecting to love the book, even just because of all the wonderful pictures from the history of the band in here, for all the curiosities about their evolution and their creative process, but I wasn't expecting to enjoy it quite so much as a piece of writing, as a text. This really is one of the most stimulating reads I've encountered in quite a while, and for that reason I absolutely recommend it to anyone interested in this rather creative, rather quirky, rather stimulating ways of presenting history. This is, in an ideal world, I feel like all of my favorite bands would put out books that look like this. To anyone who's interested even marginally in the history, again, of New York City, of hardcore and hip-hop, and of course of the Beastie Boys. And again, I absolutely recommend it, couldn't recommend it highly enough. If you've read the book, what did you think about it? If you're interested in the Beastie Boys, if you appreciate them as a band, I look forward to discussing some Beastie Boys lore with you in the comment section below. And by all means, do click on that link in the description box and check out Skillshare. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Skillshare is a community of creatives. And that idea of community, that communal dimension, that idea that you can share your passion and your interests with people who love the things you love just as much as you do, is what I find especially stimulating about the website, and what might make it especially relevant and useful these days when many of us are confined to our homes. A class on Skillshare that I really appreciated recently was about music producing, and about the relationship between producers and artists, and about the role of the producer at large. It was given by Focus, a producer who has worked with some of the greatest names in recent pop music, Kendrick Lamar, Dr. Dre, Beyoncé, and what I liked about it so much was that it offered a mixture of theoretical knowledge in terms of what a producer is supposed to do, of personal insight into how to establish a deep and meaningful relationship with the artists you work with, and of technical details in terms of what programs to use, how to go about the nitty-gritty of working as a producer. And the great thing, as pointed out by Focus in the introduction to the class, is that it's not a class aimed at people who want to make money out of music, but who want to turn music into a career. And there's a difference. It's aimed at people who are very passionate and feel a very deep love for what they do, and that passion, that commitment to the craft is what I like about so many classes on Skillshare. I recommend you check out the video, and once more, let me know what you thought about Beastie Boys book, if you've read it, about the Beastie Boys in general, in the comment section below. Let me know if you'd like me to talk more about music writing. I do read a lot of that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.